I grew up on the south side of Chicago, in a small apartment above a laundromat where the machines never stopped humming. My mother raised me alone. She worked double shifts, slept too little, and somehow still found the strength to keep our world running. My father was a rumor more than a person. I think he called once when I was 9. I didn't recognize his voice. People always assume women in my line of work come from chaos, but that's not the truth. My mother gave me stability, boundaries, and the belief that I could survive anything. What she couldn't give me was money. Not the kind that keeps you afloat when life suddenly decides to test you. I was 19 the first time the ground fell out from under me. My dog, Milo, got seriously sick, one of those emergencies where the vet's face tells you the bill will hurt before you even ask. My mom tried to help, but she had her own stack of bills and a new relationship complicating everything at home. I felt myself disappearing from her priority list, little by little. I still loved her, but I knew I couldn't rely on her anymore. I was working 2 part-time jobs, minimum wage, unpredictable hours, and still coming up short. That's when dancing entered my life. Not because I had a dream of doing it, but because I needed the kind of money that didn't require waiting 2 weeks for a paycheck. Everyone thinks the first night stripping is wild. Dramatic, neon lights and chaos, but for me it was quiet. Too quiet. I walked into the club with shaking hands and a fake ID someone from my neighborhood printed for $60. The floor smelled like perfume and spilled beer. And the music was low, not loud enough to hide my heartbeat. My audition song was Britney Spears' Circus. Not because it meant something to me, but because it was the first thing I found on my phone. I remember the manager watching me with this expression that wasn't judgment or approval, just calculation. A business decision. When he nodded and said, "You're hired," it felt like stepping through a door I could never unlock. That first club wasn't glamorous. Dim lights, worn carpet, regulars who knew the bartender better than they knew their own wives. But it taught me something important. People walk into those places not just for fantasy, but for comfort. To talk, to feel human for a minute. I wasn't a therapist, but sometimes it felt like money came fast. Faster than anything I had ever experienced. In one night, I could make what took me 2 weeks at my other jobs. And that kind of money, at 19, feels addictive, powerful, dangerous. But the real turning point, the moment my life shifted again, was when one of the older dancers pulled me aside. She wasn't unkind, but she was blunt. She said, "Don't get attached. Don't fall for the customers. And don't let them convince you that your worth depends on their attention." I nodded like I understood, but the truth is, I didn't. I was naive. I thought people who treated me kindly must actually care. I didn't know yet that kindness can be currency in those places just like money. I made mistakes. I caught feelings for a regular. I let the lines blur. I didn't understand what I was giving away, not my body, but my sense of direction. I let other people decide who I was, what I was worth, what I deserved. Chicago can be harsh, but it also raises fighters. And somewhere between the late night rides home and the early morning walks to my second job, I realized something. I didn't want to be controlled by survival anymore. I didn't want my identity shaped by desperation. So I shifted. I learned boundaries. I learned that I could take up space without letting others take pieces of me. And eventually, I learned that I had more power than I thought. People think women end up in fetish work because they're lost. But for me, it was the opposite. I was finally starting to find myself. To understand myself. To recognize what made me uncomfortable and what made me strong. Before all the specifics. Before the stories. Before the labels. That's who I was, a 19-year-old girl on a quiet Chicago night, looking up at the sky and asking herself the question every woman asks at least once. Who am I becoming? Part of me knew even then, the answer wouldn't be simple and it wouldn't be clean. But it would be mine. And that was enough to keep going. By the time I turned 20, the club didn't feel like a temporary detour anymore. It felt like a world with its own rules, ones I was slowly learning to navigate. Chicago nightlife is its own universe. The neon, the noise, the characters who walk in at 2 a.m. with tired eyes and heavy stories. I learned quickly that people who come to clubs aren't always looking for excitement. Most of the time, they're looking for escape. I remember one night when the club was unusually packed. Music loud enough to shake the mirrors. Girls rushing back and forth in heels that were too high for the floor to be that sticky. My shift had just started when one of the managers approached me and said a group in the VIP area had asked for me specifically. I'd never seen them before, but they looked like they belonged in a different part of the city. Tailored suits, polished watches. The kind of confidence that turns everything into a stage. They didn't want anything wild. They wanted someone who would listen. That surprised me. I was ready for small talk, maybe a dance or two, but instead they wanted to talk about life, about the pressure of their careers, their failing marriages, the loneliness they couldn't admit to anyone else. And I realized something. The club wasn't really about seduction. It was about vulnerability disguised as vice. One of the men told me, "It's easier to talk to someone who doesn't expect anything from me." I didn't know how to respond, so I just listened. That became my role, someone people could open up to without fear. It wasn't glamorous, but it was strangely human. Still, the more I saw, the more I understood the darker parts of that environment. Not everything was dangerous, but some things were unpredictable. People under pressure do unpredictable things. People on substances do unpredictable things. And women working alone late at night are always expected to manage the emotions of others. One night, a younger dancer pulled me aside in the dressing room. She was crying silently, trying not to ruin her makeup. She told me a customer had tried to follow her to the parking lot after closing. Security stepped in, but the fear in her eyes stayed with me. It was the first time I understood that attention isn't the same as safety. I didn't quit, I needed the money. But I became more alert. I stopped being naive. I began noticing patterns. Who drank too much, who talked too loudly, who was respectful, who wasn't. And above all, I learned to trust my instincts, something I had ignored for too long. Around this time, something unexpected happened. A new dancer named Lila joined the club. She was the opposite of me, bold, loud, sharp as a flame. She took one look at me on my first break and said, "You're too soft for this business. Either you harden up or you burn out." But she didn't say it like a threat. She said it like a warning from someone who'd already learned the lesson the hard way. Lila became the closest thing I had to a mentor. She taught me how to set boundaries with customers, how to negotiate, how to keep myself emotionally separate from the performance. One night, she showed me something that would change the direction of my life completely. It was after closing, and we were sitting in the dressing room counting our money. Lila pulled out her phone and showed me a message from someone asking to buy pictures of her feet. I laughed. I thought she was joking. But she wasn't. She told me there was a whole online community of people who had specific preferences, kinks. Yes, but ones that didn't involve touching, danger, or crossing lines. She said, "Trust me. It's cleaner, it's safer, and you're still in control." I didn't understand it at first. But I was curious in a way that wasn't rooted in fear or desperation, but in possibility. The idea that I could earn money without putting myself in unsafe situations felt like a door opening. Lila helped me create my first anonymous page. Just pictures, nothing revealing, nothing risky. My hands were shaking as I uploaded the first photo. But within an hour, someone sent a message saying, "Your content is stunning. Stunning." No one had ever said that to me before. Within days, I started making enough money to cover bills without relying so heavily on physical work in the club. My confidence shifted. For the first time, I felt like I had agency, like I wasn't just reacting to life, but shaping it. But with new opportunities came new confusion. I felt torn between two worlds, the chaos of the club. I felt torn between two worlds. The chaos of the clubs. The chaos of the club, which had become strangely familiar, and this new digital space where I could control every interaction. I wasn't sure which path to take or whether I even had to choose. One late night, after a shift that drained me emotionally, I walked out into the cold Chicago air and looked up at the sky, just like I had when I was 19. The stars were faint, hidden by city lights, but I still whispered the question, who am I becoming now? This time the answer felt different. Less frightened. More certain. I wasn't the same girl who had walked into that club with shaking hands. I wasn't the same girl. By 23, my life felt split into two versions of me. The girl who performed under neon lights, and the woman who was slowly learning what power felt like. The club taught me how to read people in seconds. The online world taught me how to stand on my own. But the truth is, both worlds were beginning to collide. It happened slowly. A regular at the club. Someone quiet, polite, the kind who tipped well and didn't overstep, asked if I'd ever considered doing customs. I didn't know what he meant. He explained it gently. Pictures, videos, voice messages, all within my boundaries. All on my terms, nothing I wasn't comfortable with. At first, I felt nervous. The internet can be cruel and unpredictable. And I was already carrying enough danger in my offline life. But something inside me whispered, you're allowed to choose yourself. So one night, at Lila's apartment, a small place filled with mismatched lamps, glitter makeup, and the smell of cheap incense, I recorded my first custom video. It was simple, quiet, nothing explicit. I remember feeling awkward, almost shy. But when the payment came through, I stared at my phone for a long time. It wasn't the money that shook me. It was the realization that for the first time in my life, I wasn't depending on anyone else's mood or desire to stay safe. I had control. That feeling started a shift inside me. I didn't quit the club. Not yet. But I walked into work differently, chin higher, heartbeat steadier, more aware of my own boundaries. The environment didn't change, but I did. And that made everything look different. I was walking to my car after a slow shift. The parking lot was dim, security busy dealing with another incident. I heard footsteps behind me. Fast, heavy, too close. My heart jumped. I turned around sharply. It was a customer I had danced for earlier, someone who had seemed harmless but clearly wasn't. He said, "Why'd you ignore me at the end? You owe me more time." Every part of me froze. My mind screamed every warning I'd ignored for years. Before he got closer, a security guard appeared from around the corner yelling. The man backed off, muttering, disappearing into the darkness. I sat in my car afterward, hands shaking, tears burning behind my eyes. Not because of fear, because of clarity. I couldn't keep existing in a world where safety was a gamble. Not when I had another path forming right in front of me. That night, I made a decision. Not dramatic. Not sudden, but firm. I would leave the club. Not immediately, but eventually. I would build something with my own voice. My own boundaries, my own identity. When I got home, I opened my laptop and stared at the screen. For the first time, I didn't see a hobby, I saw a future. I wasn't fully healed, I wasn't fully safe, but I was stepping into a version of myself who finally understood her worth. And that version of me, the real Imani, was just beginning to rise. There's something people don't tell you about survival. You don't wake up healed. You don't wake up fearless. You don't wake up transformed. You wake up carrying every version of yourself at once. The wounded child, the angry teenager, the exhausted young woman, and the future self begging you not to give up. For me, healing didn't begin in a therapist's office or a hospital bed. It began in silence. The kind of silence that forces you to hear your own thoughts without interruption. After I decided to slowly leave the club, I found myself spending long hours alone in my small studio apartment. The place wasn't glamorous, peeling paint near the windows, radiators that climbed like ghosts, a tiny kitchenette with a broken drawer, but it was mine. Every inch of it held a promise. No one enters without my permission. I would sit on the floor near the heater at night, wrapped in a blanket, scrolling through messages from online clients. Not the explicit messages, the personal ones. Thank you for being kind. You made my week better. You seem like you've been through a lot, but still glow. It stunned me that strangers could see gentleness in me when I had spent years expecting danger. But the more my online work grew, the more another truth surfaced. I had never dealt with the things that shaped me. I had never talked about the man who made me feel unsafe in my own skin. I had never talked about the fear that followed me home from the club. I had never talked about the loneliness that wrapped itself around me. Every night. One evening, Lila came over. She sat cross-legged on my floor, eating Chinese takeout straight from the container, her nails chipped, her hair tied up messily. She looked exhausted. You ever feel like people see the outside of you but not the inside? She asked. I nodded, because I knew normal wasn't a house with a garden. Normal wasn't a 9-to-5. Normal, to me, meant safety. Normal meant not being hunted by the world's desires. Normal meant sleep, without nightmares. But I didn't know how to say that, so I just whispered, yeah, sometimes. That conversation stayed with me. In the months that followed, my online presence kept growing. I wasn't posting explicit content. I was posting personality, humor, creativity, kind of bold vulnerability that made people feel close to me. I didn't sell my body. I sold connection, confidence. A curated version of strength. But behind the screen, I was unraveling quietly. Some nights I would wake up from dreams of my childhood. Memories I never asked for. Hands I didn't want. Voices I couldn't escape. The feeling of being too small. Too powerless. Other nights, I would find myself standing in my bathroom staring at my reflection for too long. Not because I liked what I saw, but because I didn't know whose face it was anymore. I realized that trauma isn't loud. It's subtle. It sits behind your eyes, waits in your muscles, and whispers during the quiet moments. But healing, I learned, also moves in silence. It started with small things. I began taking early morning walks around my neighborhood, bundled in my coat, listening to the city wake up. Chicago streets at dawn are strangely peaceful. No honking, no rush, just soft lights spreading across the buildings. Those walks became my anchor. For the first time in years, I could breathe without fear. I started journaling, writing things I couldn't say out loud. Healing didn't arrive as a sudden moment of clarity. It came in pieces, small, almost invisible shifts that only made sense when I looked backward. By the time spring arrived in Chicago, I had quietly built a life that didn't resemble anything I came from. I was still working online, but with different intentions now. I wasn't using it to escape or numb myself. I was using it to rebuild on my terms, with my boundaries. With my voice. Boundaries. That was the word my therapist repeated over and over until it finally stuck. For the first time in my life, I understood something simple but life-changing. No is a complete sentence. I learned to say it without apologizing. Without explaining. Without shrinking. Some people left. Some people stayed. And some people, the ones I thought I needed, disappeared the moment I started respecting myself. It hurt, but it also cleared space. One person who surprised me was Lila. One night she knocked on my door wearing pajamas and carrying 2 bags of microwave popcorn. She sat cross-legged on my bed, looked around my tiny apartment, and said, "It feels different in here." You feel different. I didn't know what to say, so I asked, different good or different bad? She smiled. Different honest. Honest. That word lingered. Because honesty, the kind that starts inside you, is terrifying. It forces you to see the parts of yourself you've avoided for years. It forces you to choose growth over comfort, and it forces you to confront the memories you survived but never processed. For me, honesty brought grief. Deep, old grief I had buried so far down I forgot it belonged to. Grief for the child who never felt safe. Grief for the teenager who confused abuse for affection. Grief for the young woman who stepped into strip club lights not because she wanted to, but because she didn't know she deserved more. One day, during therapy, my therapist asked, "What would you say to the version of you who survived everything you did?" I didn't speak for a full minute. Then the words finally came. "I'm sorry you had to survive so much just to learn that you mattered." For the first time, I cried without feeling ashamed. That moment changed something in me. I stopped running from my past and started integrating it, not as something that defined me, but as something I had overcome. Around that time, something unexpected began happening. Men who once treated me as a fantasy started treating me as a person. Women who followed my account messaged me saying my confidence helped them unlock their own. And one woman, a stranger in her 50s, wrote, "You remind me of who I wanted to be before life took pieces of me." I read that sentence at least 10 times. It reminded me that healing is contagious. When you grow, you give others permission to grow too. Still, life wasn't perfect. Some nights I still woke up trembling,